Greetings Commanders and welcome to episode 6 of the tutorial series of how to play Supreme Commander Forged Alliance Forever. My name is Serbia Pride and I am still your instructor for this particular series. By now you have already covered, or hopefully covered if you paid attention, the basics of how to start a game. You will know how to set up your initial base, some stable initial build orders, and the concepts of how to take over the map and the importance of taking it. Whilst technically you can jump into a game and explore the world for yourself, I would recommend that you spend a little bit more time watching the rest of the series, because, to be honest, most people enjoy games because they like to win. And it is one of the facts of life that this particular episode is quite important, because knowing what you're fighting against is incredibly useful if you want to win. Understanding such basics requires a bit of input early on, but later on will pay dividends as it becomes second nature to you. The more this becomes second nature, the more you understand it, the easier it is to win, and it's definitely easier to win against someone who has no clue what they're doing. So, if you follow all of this series, you will have an advantage over people who do not. Assuming you're beginning anyway. Anyway, I rattle on. This particular episode will cover the concepts of intelligence. That of knowing what you're fighting against, or at least trying to get a good idea of it. So in this particular instance we're going to focus on the notion of radar, or as I like to call it, indirect vision. When you start the game, you have what you see around you, which is known as direct vision, or like the game calls, optical sensors, and then you have the fog of war. What is in the fog of war is that it says it is unknown, it is clouded. Obviously, as time goes on, you'll realize that early on in the game, there is no possibility of any units being here, because it's just too soon. However, as the game progresses, more uncertainty enters due to the fact that there are more units involved. People will start killing your radars. But in general, you want to establish control over the situation of your territory by knowing what the heck is going in or out of it. And the best way to do that, I need to stop twisting the microphone because of the crackling, I will apologize for that, is simply to establish an unbroken radar net. The idea of this is relatively straightforward. Once you have, or hopefully in the last episode, I activated the Intel overlay, radar units will produce a blue circle around them. These include radar units, these will include radar structures. The idea of creating a radar net is to create an unbroken radar line across your territory so you know what goes in. Therefore, you do not need radar to cover the back of your base, because you already know what's going in. If nothing has punctured this line, you know there's nothing there. Early on, however, before you can establish strong radars, you have to create a situation as soon as possible where either you take a risk or you know what's going in or out. For instance, in this particular instance, Yorick, the Seraphim player, has decided to create a limited sensor net across the middle of the map. Whilst technically speaking raiding units could go around it, he has decided that this is the most efficient way he wishes to use his units, because most people, in the early game at least, will utilize what's things known as light assault bots, and the most effective way and most common way people use it is straight through the middle to get to the enemy as quickly as possible. Thus, when you have limited radar, it demonstrates the point that you want to place them where you feel the enemy is most likely to traverse. This comes with experience, but at the same time, you can see the beginnings of an unbroken radar net, so he has control over the knowledge of what enters in or out. Imagine if this radar net was not here, he would have no idea if there were units entering on his right flank or on his left flank or anywhere whatsoever. All races have access to Tech 1 scouts with radar. All factions also have access to Tech 1 air scouts. The differences are very minimal, mainly that Seraphim Tech 1 land scouts have less radar range. But the intricate details of the differences between units, between factions, are covered in Brink's tutorial videos. I'll now consider a bit of a talk about air scouts. These units are not really used for their radar, they are more used for their speed and the relative difficulty in denying their ability to simply get visual ID of enemy positions. This is because whatever is uncovered visually in the game is remembered as such, and they will remain there. So for instance, Yorick now has an idea that there is one air factory next to the Hydro, and there are only 2 land factories up. This is a concept known as scouting, where you can try and find out what your opponent is doing. Scouting saves lives, because it'll save you from disastrous traps, it'll stop you from throwing your commander into 30 enemy tanks, etc. But it is a concept, and indeed a habit, that needs to be formed, and many higher level players neglect the concept of scouting. One way that you can try and get this habit into you early is to simply do a build such as this, where you mix in 1 air scout with X amount of interceptors or air units. 3 to 1 is common, 4 to 5 to 1 is also common. But it also depends on your playstyle. Moving swiftly on. There comes a point where you wish to employ stronger radars. These are stationary Tech 1 radars, and they cover a large area. Early on, this will be sufficient, as you generally want to... you need this to cover a certain area, and they're stable radars. The only issue is, at the early stages of the game, if you want a radar to be effective, it has to be relatively far forward, and that puts it at risk. So most people will endeavor to put a radar in their most critical choke point locations, in a defensible location, and they'll gain a few seconds notice if something is trying to attack you. Of course, the caveat is you have no idea what is beyond that radar range at this point, and the radar range isn't that large, all things considered. You can upgrade a radar, but the cost of upgrading the radar is not insignificant, and you will need a fairly advanced economy in order to get higher level radars. That said, when you place radars, you should bear a few things in mind. That is their coverage, and also how easy they are to destroy. So, in this example, Yorick has chosen to place a radar on the plateau here. The reason this is he has even more advanced intelligence of where units are going once this is activated, and also because it is on a plateau, it is much harder to kill. This is why center of the maps and high terrain is generally considered to be favorable, and it creates areas to fight over. It is desirable to seize the high ground, or at least to seize areas of interest on the map, just so you can activate these radars. So as you see, Yorick has placed one of these structures here. He knows these units are now going, whereas if he placed it further back, he would not know that there are reinforcements approaching the right flank. Likewise, he's now going to put one on the left flank, so he has an idea of what covers this space as well. It is worth noting that radars are incredibly fragile structures, and indeed, in most cases, if you sneeze at them, they will die. This is true up to Tech 3 radars, where even an Omni only has 100 hit points, and a lowly Tech 1 bomber can kill it. Moral of the story is, if you're going to upgrade your radars, at least give some protection to them, so they don't just die at the drop of a hat, because they are relatively expensive. And you can't, A, you can't, and B, you shouldn't spam them out. That brings me nicely to the point of why you should not spam radars, is because they cost a generator in themselves to run. Early game, you can't really afford to just throw 2 generators worth of mass away for no good reason. And it is why, for instance, in this case, Yorick wants to take the high ground and place 2 radars in the center as opposed to the flanks here. A, because it just saves on mass, B, because this is the most efficient way of creating a radar net. And that is all that I wish to cover for this particular tutorial. Not tutorial, this section of the tutorial. In this particular video section, I'll be discussing the concepts of how to identify what you find on Strategic Zoom. I would like to stress that you should try and spend as much time in Strategic Zoom as possible, purely because it gives you the best, well, overview of the entire theatre of battle right now. But at the beginning, it can be quite a headache to recognize everything that you might see. But in general, you still have rules that I have stressed in the previous sections. Ground units will be diamonds, structures, squares, and aircraft, or things which are in the sky, will be triangles. You still get this. Structures are squares, aircraft are triangles, and units are basically neither of the above. It is also worth stressing at this point that experimentals are a circle. A big, fat circle with nothing on them, and it's basically quite attention grabbing to state, this thing is dangerous, you should probably pay attention to it. Anyway. The other thing, at a glance, is the tech level of said unit. Once you have it on your radar and have seen it, will be stated underneath said icon. So for instance, a power generator like this has 3 of these little white bits underneath it. Tech 1 PD is not surprisingly Tech 1, has 1 icon beneath it. Shields, or at least this type of shield, is Tech 2, so it has 2 beneath it. That is basically it, really. Assault bots have an X. Normal bots are a plus, and tanks are also a plus, actually, but they are diamond, and bots are this hexagonal shape. Tech 3 anti-air is this type of upside down U, and you will get to know this as time goes on. It is at this point that I will also stress what radar and Omni does. As you see here, this is the Omni range. It is the brown circle. You also find it upon your ACU. Omni radar, Tech 3 structure. If we zoom out, you see it's a radar structure. It has 3 icons underneath it. Has the how we say Omni radar, which is the inner ring only, and the outer radar, which functions as normal radar, which means it can be defeated by stealth. And as you see here, as units enter the Omni range, they lose their stealth because it's defeated by Omni radar. The range of the Omni on Omni radar is the same as a normal Tech 2 radar. The other caveat about this is that Omni also functions as sonar. So Omni radar is needed to defeat all types of counter intel. It'll counter stealth, it'll counter jamming, it'll counter cloaking. But its range is limited, and of course its power consumption is not insignificant. At the moment it has reduced power cost, but mainly because it's stuck next to 2 Tech 3 power generators. Again, this is not shielded. One random bomb and it'll go and snuff the big one. As time goes on, you will learn to identify structures and icons and their units by just experience, really. No one expects you to be able to tell at a glance what everything is, but you should be able to tell numbers. For instance, in this situation, you could probably tell there's a lot of units up here, there's not much to defend with, you're probably going to have to fall back. Other things that you should get into the habit of is scouting the enemy opponent. Well, that's pretty much exactly the same thing, but yeah. Scout your opponent, and then you'll be able to have a look at their base. At a glance, you then should be able to tell what they're up to. For instance, as time goes on, you'll be able to spot structures such as SMD and mark them, or vice versa from the other perspective. This is the importance of scouting. This was built because these players are very experienced and they simply expect such things such as nuclear missiles to be in play. He did not actually scout. This was the fact. This was in fact the case. There are other tips that you can use, but I will cover this in the advanced tutorial.
Strategic launch detected.
And normally, if you hear that sound, it's generally time to run away unless you are covered by SMD. And if you are covered by SMD, please make sure A, it's loaded, and B, it's actually still there. If not, time to head for the hills, ladies and gentlemen.